Civilizations never collapse the way people expect. There's no single moment when everything breaks. No alarm, no announcement, no clear line between stability and disaster. Collapse arrives quietly, disguised as normal life, as routines, as headlines you stop paying attention to, as small changes that feel temporary until they aren't. History shows this pattern again and again. Societies don't fall from strength. They fall from comfort, from the belief that tomorrow will look like today, that institutions will hold, that systems built by humans are somehow immune to human failure. Think about Rome. Not the burning city, not the statues falling, not the final sack. Long before that, Rome looked functional. Markets were open. Soldiers were paid. Laws were enforced. People went to work. Taxes were collected. On the surface, Rome was still Rome. But underneath, something had shifted. Currency had been debased. Trust had eroded. Power had centralized. Debt had grown. The cost of maintaining the empire exceeded what the system could sustainably produce. None of that felt like collapse at the time. It felt like policy, like necessity, like adjustment. That's always how it begins. Collapse doesn't start with chaos. It starts with justification. Leaders explain why rules must change, why money must be created, why debts can be rolled forward, why sacrifices are temporary. And most people accept it, not because they're foolish, but because rejecting it would mean admitting something terrifying, that the system they depend on might be fragile. In the late stages of many civilizations, people don't panic. They normalize. They adapt downward. They lower expectations. They redefine success. What once felt like decline becomes the new baseline. Bread gets smaller. Taxes get higher. Work hours extend. Savings lose value. Infrastructure decays. Trust thins. And yet life continues. Children go to school. Stores stay open. Entertainment distracts. The illusion of continuity remains intact. This is why collapse is so dangerous. It doesn't announce itself as collapse. It presents itself as resilience. We see it in every major historical breakdown. In late-stage empires, wealth concentrates while productivity stalls. Debt replaces growth. Financial systems become more complex, not to create value, but to delay consequences. Currency loses its anchor to reality, and the gap between what people are told and what they experience widens. At first, the gap is small, annoying but manageable. Then it grows. Prices rise faster than wages. Promises shrink. Institutions feel distant. Rules change unpredictably. People sense something is wrong, but struggle to name it. That discomfort is critical. It's the moment when a civilization still has a choice, though most don't realize it. Instead of confronting structural problems, systems usually choose the easier path. More control, more borrowing, more narrative management. The goal isn't to fix the foundation. It's to preserve appearances, to buy time, to push the cost forward. And for a while, it works. That's the most deceptive stage of collapse. The one where things still function just enough to lull people into thinking the danger has passed. When markets recover just enough. When growth numbers look acceptable. When confidence is manufactured through repetition rather than substance. But beneath the surface, the damage compounds. Civilizations don't die from a single wound. They bleed slowly. And most people don't notice the blood because it never spills all at once. By the time collapse becomes visible, it's usually irreversible. Not because solutions don't exist, but because trust is already gone. Social cohesion is fractured. Resources are exhausted. And the system no longer has the credibility to ask people for real sacrifice. The uncomfortable truth is this. If collapse looked like collapse from the beginning, people would resist it. They would demand change. They would protect themselves earlier. That's why it never looks that way at first. It looks normal. If this way of looking at history feels unsettling, that's a good sign. It means you're paying attention to patterns instead of events. And that shift, from react and understanding, is the difference between being surprised by collapse and recognizing it while there's still time. If you want to keep developing that lens, stay with me. Once a civilization passes the early stage, the damage becomes harder to hide, but still easy to rationalize. This is the phase where systems continue to operate, yet no longer inspire confidence. People comply, but they don't believe. They participate, but they don't trust. And that distinction changes everything. Trust is the invisible infrastructure of any society. It's what makes paper money valuable. What allows laws to be followed without constant force? What keeps people investing in the future instead of extracting everything they can in the present? When trust is strong, systems can survive stress. When trust erodes, even strong systems begin to rot from the inside. Historically, this is where civilizations start to cannibalize themselves. In the middle stage of collapse, institutions become self-preserving rather than service-oriented. Their primary function shifts. Instead of supporting society, they exist to justify their own continuation. Rules multiply. Bureaucracy thickens. Accountability disappears upward, while pressure increases downward. People feel it first in subtle ways. Processes take longer. Decisions feel arbitrary. Outcomes seem disconnected from effort. Merit loses meaning. Connections matter more than competence. The message becomes clear without being spoken. The system no longer rewards contribution. It rewards positioning. At this stage, money tells the truth before leaders do. Currencies begin to lose purchasing power, not in dramatic spikes at first, but in a steady, grinding way. Savings shrink quietly. Long-term planning becomes harder. People are forced into constant short-term thinking just to stay afloat. This isn't an accident. It's a feature of late-stage systems under strain. When trust weakens, people change their behavior. They stop investing emotionally in the future. They delay families. They hoard assets. They speculate instead of build. They look for exits rather than roots. Society doesn't collapse outward. It collapses inward. History is brutally consistent here. In late Roman society, tax burdens became unbearable, not because the empire was expanding, but because it was trying to maintain complexity without the productivity to support it. Farmers abandoned land. Trade shrank. Local elites withdrew loyalty from the center. Rome didn't fall because people rebelled. It fell because people disengaged. The same pattern appeared in Weimar Germany. Long before hyperinflation exploded, confidence was already broken. People rushed to convert money into anything tangible. Foreign currency, goods, assets, trust in institutions evaporated before prices fully spiraled. By the time the collapse was undeniable, social cohesion had already dissolved. This is a dangerous illusion of the middle stage. Leaders still have tools, but they've lost legitimacy. They can enforce, but they can't inspire. They can print, but they can't restore faith. So narratives become louder. You're told the economy is strong while you feel weaker. You're told the system is stable while rules change constantly. You're told sacrifices are necessary while inequality widens. And over time, the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. That's when anger enters the picture. Not explosive anger at first, a low-grade, constant frustration. A sense that something is unfair, rigged, or slipping away. People argue more. Polarization increases. Groups stop seeing each other as partners in a shared future and start seeing each other as obstacles. This isn't cultural decay. It's structural stress expressing itself socially. In every civilization that reaches this stage, there's a critical shift. Survival replaces optimism. People no longer ask, how do we build something better? They ask, how do I protect what I have left? And that question changes behavior at every level, personal, economic, political. When enough people stop believing in the system becomes incredibly fragile, not because it collapses immediately, but because it loses the one thing it cannot manufacture, voluntary participation. From the outside, Everything may still look intact. Markets still trade. Governments still function. Laws are still enforced. But underneath, the social contract has cracked. And once that crack spreads far enough, collapse stops being a possibility and becomes a process. The middle stage is the point of no return for many civilizations, not because collapse is inevitable, but because denial is more comfortable than reform. Understanding this stage isn't about fear. It's about clarity. Because once you can see where society truly is in the cycle, events stop feeling random. They start making sense. The final stage doesn't begin with chaos. It begins with efficiency, but the wrong kind. By the time a civilization reaches this phase, most of the creative energy that once built it has already been spent. Growth slows. Innovation becomes cosmetic. Productivity no longer comes from creating new value, but from extracting more from what already exists. Systems stop asking how to expand the pie and focus instead on how to control the slices. This is when collapse becomes systemic. In the late stage, power concentrates rapidly. Institutions merge. Markets consolidate. Political influence narrows. The distance between decision makers and the consequences of their decisions grows wider every year. Policies are no longer designed to improve outcomes. They're designed to manage optics and postpone reckoning. You can feel this stage even if you can't name it. Work becomes more demanding but less rewarding. Effort increases while purchasing power shrinks. Risk is socialized downward while protection flows upward. Mistakes made at the top are absorbed by the public. Mistakes made at the bottom are punished instantly. At this point, the system is no longer neutral. It has a direction, and that direction is extraction. Historically, this is where societies turn inward and predatory. In late-stage empires, taxes rise not to fund progress, but to maintain existing structures. Debt explodes, not to invest in the future, but to preserve the present. Currency is diluted to cover shortfalls, quietly transferring wealth from savers to debtors. The mechanics are complex, but the outcome is simple. Those closest to the source of money and power are insulated. Everyone else absorbs the loss. This is not mismanagement. It's survival behavior by the system itself. As resources tighten, institutions prioritize their own continuity above all else. Laws become more flexible for insiders and more rigid for everyone else. Enforcement becomes selective. Narratives become aggressive. The system demands loyalty while offering less in return. And this is where psychological pressure peaks. People sense an imbalance, but they're trapped within it. Exiting the system feels dangerous. Staying feels suffocating. So they comply outwardly while disengaging inwardly. Civic trust collapses. Long-term thinking disappears. Everything becomes transactional. In Rome, this was the era of debased coinage and mandatory professions, where citizens were legally bound to roles to keep the economy functioning. In the Soviet Union, it was the era of fake productivity and hollow statistics, where the system pretended to work while everyone knew it didn't. In countless other societies, the pattern repeats with different faces, but identical structure. Late-stage systems survive by inertia, not strength. They don't collapse because people rise up all at once. They collapse because too many people quietly stop caring. They stop building, stop innovating, stop trusting, stop believing their sacrifices will lead anywhere meaningful. This is the most dangerous moment, not when shelves are empty, but when purpose is. Once a society reaches this stage, reforms become almost impossible. Any meaningful change threatens entrenched interests. Any redistribution of power risks destabilizing the system faster than leaders are willing to accept. So adjustments become symbolic. Language becomes softer. Reality becomes harsher. The system continues, but only by consuming itself. Wealth extraction accelerates. Assets concentrate. Younger generations inherit fewer opportunities and more obligations. Debt becomes generational. Optimism becomes nostalgia. The future feels smaller than the past. And yet, from the outside, everything still looks remarkably normal. This is why late-stage collapse is so difficult to recognize in real time. There's no single moment, no announcement, no obvious line crossed. Just a gradual realization that the system no longer exists to serve the people within it, but to sustain itself at their expense. At this point, collapse is no longer about economics or politics. It's about psychology, about whether people continue to consent to a structure that no longer offers a future they want to be part of. And once that consent erodes far enough, the final transition doesn't need violence to complete itself. It happens through withdrawal, through disengagement, through the quiet refusal to keep giving more than you receive. Civilizations don't fall when they are attacked. They fall when they extract until there's nothing left to give. There's a moment in every collapsing civilization when the problem stops being structural and becomes psychological. This is a breaking point, not when markets crash, not when governments fall, but when trust, the invisible glue holding everything together, quietly evaporates. When people stop believing that the future will reward patience, effort, or loyalty. At this stage, the system may still function on paper, but it no longer functions in the minds of the people living inside it. You can see it in small behaviors first. People stop planning long-term. Careers become temporary strategies, not identities. Families delay children or abandon the idea entirely. Savings turn into speculation or disappear altogether. The idea of sacrifice for a future payoff feels naive, even dangerous. This isn't decadence. It's adaptation. When trust collapses, rational behavior changes. Historically, this is the point where systems begin cannibalizing their own foundations. Institutions designed to protect stability start accelerating instability in an attempt to preserve control. Rules multiply. Surveillance expands. Compliance becomes more important than competence. Appearance matters more than outcomes. And the more pressure applied, the faster trust erodes. In late-stage Rome, citizens no longer believed taxes funded a future worth sustaining. They believed taxes fed a machine that no longer protected them. In pre-revolutionary France, faith in the monarchy dissolved long before the first barricade was built. In modern collapses, the pattern repeats digitally rather than physically, but the psychology is identical. Once trust breaks, participation becomes forced rather than voluntary. People still work, but they disengage emotionally. They still follow laws, but only under threat. They still use a currency, but they don't believe in it. Every interaction becomes transactional, defensive, short-term. The system interprets this as a discipline problem. It responds with tighter controls, harsher penalties, louder messaging. It tells people to believe harder, trust more, comply longer. But trust cannot be commanded. It can only be earned. And once broken at scale, it almost never returns. This is where collapse accelerates invisibly. Innovation slows because risk feels pointless. Why build something new if the system will eventually extract it from you? Why invest decades of effort when the rules can change overnight? Why play a game when you no longer believe the scoreboard is real? Capital flees quietly. Talent disengages. Creativity goes underground. The most capable individuals stop trying to fix the system and start figuring out how to survive it. This creates a feedback loop. The system loses its best contributors, which reduces productivity, which increases pressure, which further erodes trust. Each attempt to stabilize the structure weakens it more. Each layer of control adds fragility. At this point, collapse becomes a matter of timing, not possibility. And yet, this is also the stage where narratives become the most aggressive, where leaders insist stability has never been stronger, where dissent is framed as danger, where questioning the system is treated as betrayal. That's not confidence. That's fear. Strong systems tolerate doubt. Weak systems suppress it. By the time trust is gone, people are no longer asking how to improve the future. They're asking how to protect themselves from it. They shift from contribution to extraction, mirroring the system that failed them. This is why late-stage civilizations often feel strangely hollow. Everything still exists, the buildings, the institutions, the rituals, but meaning has drained out of them. Participation becomes habit, not belief. Compliance replaces consent. And once enough people reach that internal conclusion, the collapse no longer needs a trigger. Any shock will do. A financial crisis, a political misstep, a social rupture, something relatively small, landing on a structure already emptied of trust. The final collapse rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It feels like resignation, like a collective understanding that something essential is gone and won't be coming back, that the system people were told to believe in no longer believes in them. This is a true end stage, not destruction, but disengagement. And once a civilization reaches this point, the question is no longer whether it will fall, but who sees it early enough to step aside before it does. When civilizations finally collapse, history tends to focus on the ruins, burned cities, failed currencies, fallen governments, dates in textbooks, before and after photos. But those details miss the most important question. Who survives intact when everything people trusted stops working? Because collapse doesn't erase everyone equally. It never has. In every historical collapse, there are two very different experiences happening at the same time. One group experiences shock, loss, confusion, and despair. The other experiences disruption, uncertainty, and opportunity. The difference is not luck, it's positioning. The people who are destroyed by collapse are almost always the ones most deeply embedded in the system that failed them. Their identity, security, and future were all tied to structures they didn't control. When those structures broke, so did their sense of stability. Their wealth was abstract. Their safety was promised. Their future was outsourced. And when the promises failed, there was nothing underneath. The people who survive and often quietly rise are different. They don't trust permanence. They don't assume stability. They don't confuse systems with reality. They understand that civilizations are temporary arrangements, not guarantees. So they build their lives accordingly. Historically, survivors share a few common traits. They hold assets that exist outside paper promises, things with intrinsic value, productive land, useful skills, businesses that solve real problems, trade networks, tangible resources, things that remain valuable regardless of which flag flies overhead or which currency is declared legal tender. They maintain mobility, not just physical, but economic and psychological. They're not emotionally dependent on a single institution, employer, or ideology. When conditions change, they adapt instead of resisting. They think in decades, not quarters. And most importantly, they understand that safety does not come from obedience. It comes from optionality. In collapsing civilizations, the most dangerous position is dependence. Dependence on pensions. Dependence on fixed incomes. Dependence on rules staying the same. Dependence on authorities acting rationally under pressure. Because under stress, systems do not behave rationally. They behave predictably. They protect themselves first. This is why collapse feels like betrayal to most people. They played by the rules. They trusted the structure. They believed contribution would be rewarded. And then when it mattered most, the system prioritized its own survival. That moment, the realization that no one is coming to save you, is devastating for some. For others, it's clarifying. Once you accept that large systems exist to preserve themselves, not you, your strategy changes. You stop asking how to win inside the system and start asking how to survive outside its failure modes. This doesn't mean rejecting society or withdrawing completely. It means reducing exposure, diversifying risk, building redundancy into your life. Civilizations don't collapse overnight. They decay unevenly. There's always a window, sometimes decades long, where those who understand the pattern can reposition quietly while others remain distracted by narratives and noise. That window is where survival is decided. The tragedy is that most people don't lose because they were incapable. They lose because they waited for certainty, for official confirmation, for permission to act. By the time collapse is undeniable, it's already too late to prepare. History rewards those who move early, quietly, and without drama. Not panic, not rebellion, just awareness. Every collapse resets the board. Old rules vanish. New hierarchies emerge. Those with adaptability, real assets, and clear-eyed understanding regain stability faster than anyone else. The rest spend years trying to rebuild what no longer exists. This is why understanding collapse is not pessimistic. It's practical. Civilizations rise. Civilizations fall. That cycle is older than recorded history. What changes is the scale, the technology, and the speed, not the pattern. The real question isn't whether the civilization is immune. It's whether you are. Because when the system you were told to trust reaches its limit, the only thing that matters is what you built before that moment arrived. Not what you were promised. Not what you believed. But what you actually control. And that is the difference between being crushed by collapse and quietly surviving it while the world resets around you.